Benny, we got a Hall of Famer alert. We have a Denver Business Journal 40 Under 40 Hall of Famer Tammi Dorr, also co-founder of Denver Startup Week, the largest free conference on tech and startups for entrepreneurs in the nation. Not only that, she's also now with Q Factor, the CEO, the legend herself, Tammi Dorr. What's up, Tammi?
Hey, Ryan. Well, a lot's up. It's good to be here.
Tammi, thank you for joining the show. Really appreciate it. We were just catching up about all things, all the ties that we have in terms of Michigan and Country Day, but thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, it's always good to start my morning with people like you.
Hey, and us you. Well, let's just start with your business story. I mean, where do I even begin? I mean, we talked about your time in Michigan, coming now over to Denver, then you did Downtown Denver Partnership. You're doing Q Factor now. Where does your business journey begin?
Well, you know what? I think my business journey really begins when I think about cities. I grew up in Flint, Michigan. Tough city. And there were a lot of things going on there when I was growing up. General Motors was struggling. Plants were leaving the city. And I remember thinking that the one thing that saves cities is great leadership. I mean, times are going to be good and times are going to be bad. But if city leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders come together and really have a vision and stick with it, everybody excels and everybody succeeds. And I didn't see it happen in my city. So I said wherever I went, whatever I did, I was going to commit myself to being the very best, either business leader, civic leader, nonprofit leader, and bring people together. And I think that really was the start of it. I saw what happens when there isn't good leadership.
So how do you get started if you want to change the leadership in the city, how do you start?
Well, I do think contrary to what most people think, a lot of people are looking for a title or a role or a position. Those are fleeting, and you can hold those roles for a while. They buy you an entry. I mean, there's no doubt, right? But the reality is there's a place and a space for anybody that wants to make a difference, but you must do what you love. If you're trying to make a difference in something you're not passionate about, simply because it seems like the right thing to be involved in, you won't be successful. It won't stay. It won't be resilient. So if you love something and care about it, step in. Any difference makes a difference.
I love the fact that you brought up your hometown and how that shaped your leadership story and your leadership journey. How does that show up? How does Flint show up in your leadership every single day? Because that is a tough city. That is a blue-collar city. But, how does that show up in your leadership every single day?
Well, that's a great question, and it truly does. Well, first of all, growing up, I thought that you'd really made it if you lived in a city that had sidewalks and, just that was it. But it shows up for me in that I believe that in anything, whether business or a city or an organization, that there's an invisible hand that's making moves. Now, the invisible hand isn't a person. It's not a thing. It's just all the small decisions that are being made every single day by a plethora of people. And when I think about Flint, I think about so many people that didn't have a voice, that really struggled, mostly because every day they were simply trying to pay their bills, support their family, and all these macro decisions were being made. They don't even know that their decision's being made or that even should be being made, but they're definitely feeling the impact. That happens on a team. That happens in a company. It happens everywhere. And I believe as a leader, you really have to show up as a steward of the people that you are working with or supposedly representing.
Yeah, servant leadership is so important. It's so important. You went to Western Michigan, and
go Broncos.
Yes, talk about your leadership journey there, and as you're going through. I think college is one of the most defining moments in your life. Those 4 years, 5 years, whatever it may be. It was 5 years for me, maybe not for Ryan, but it was 5 years for me. Talk about your leadership journey just at Western Michigan, and shout out to my brother who's assistant head coach at Western Michigan right now on the basketball side.
Well, I started out at University of Michigan Flint, so I spent my first 2 years there, and what a gift. I actually think that was one of my best academic experiences because it was a close-knit community. And also, I had to live at home. I didn't have enough money to really go away yet. I was paying for my own college. I saved enough to go away to Western. So liberating, right? We know what college is like.
Shout out to you for saving at such a young age.
Oh, yeah. That was a good time. I mostly spent my time in college working. I actually was really involved in the Greek system and took on a few key leadership roles there. But for the most part, I was working 3 jobs all the way through school. And I learned a lot from that, but I did know that as soon as I graduated, that I would probably work fewer hours no matter what I did than I ever worked at Western Michigan. Now, make no mistake, I did have a lot of fun. Yeah. Western's a really good place to have a lot of fun, but a great school. Yeah. I think I learned a lot about just working hard and working for different people and just staying the course with something. I get a lot of questions about what makes great leaders and how do people really excel? And I have one word for it. Let me rephrase it. 2 words. Hard work. I know you guys know this, but the difference between people that work hard and people that simply work is astronomical. I tell people if you just work really hard every day, you are going to reap the benefits of it because there are so many people that simply don't.
Well, what does that mean? Because we know what it looks like in football, right? Like that means showing up to practice early, asking questions in meetings. But I'm not the only athlete that when you're done playing, you're like, well, I don't know what working hard means in the business world. What does that mean to you? If you Benny or I are one of your interns at Q Factor, what do we have to do to make you say, oh, they're working hard?
Well, show up first. Show up and ask the questions. What you said is exactly right. What can I do today? What can I do that's above and beyond my job? Is there something I can learn? Can I sit in on that? I'd like to understand it better. Be curious, be inquisitive, and do a little extra every time. If in the most basic of things, if somebody asks you to run a report, do some analysis on a project, what's the little extra you do to make a couple phone calls, understand the context of something, and share that information? It always adds value, but it also makes you stand out as somebody that says, I can do just a little bit more, I can make it a little bit better.
What I just took from that and what you just said was there was the questions, like what can I do today? How can I be a little bit more curious? What's the extra effort? What does that look like? Where do those questions come from? Because obviously you ask yourself those things every single day in terms of your leadership and then how you're showing up. Where did you get that curious mind to really have that self-awareness and self-reflection, to be honest?
I do think some of it's intrinsic. I think for some people that is just something that is built in the DNA of who they are. But it can certainly be learned. And many people simply don't even know that that's something they should be doing. And I guess what I would say is that every team member, whether it's a sports team or a company, is encouraged to ask the questions, except most managers and leaders never tell them that. So I do think as leaders we have to be a little more literal. There are people that will do things better than we expect of them, but sometimes we don't give them a North Star or enough guidance. We just expect them to know that they are empowered to do a little bit more.
Sounds like there's a story there. When was the time that you thought, oh, I explained this to this person, and you didn't explain it at all? Clearly there was a mishap, and you're like, oh, bleep, this is on me. What was that taught you that lesson?
Oh, yeah, well, this is a really bad one, but I was managing a bank branch. I was worked in banking for about 10 years. At the time, I was new, first-time manager, training a new team member. I told her how to get into a safe deposit box if somebody came in and be sure to check their ID. Well, Mr. Jones, whatever his name was, came in and she knew him. So she said, oh, I'll just let you in the safe deposit box. Didn't check that it was his box and gave him $1 million out of the box, right? Here's the point. I wasn't clear enough in my direction, and I put that person in a perilous position, and the gentleman helped himself to $1 million in bearer bonds that belonged to his ex-wife. Notice the semantics of what I said. I said, make sure that you know him, but really what I needed to say is make sure that you know him, and it's a safe deposit box. Point is, as the leader, I was responsible, but it didn't matter because you break something in somebody because they didn't know. And then they also reap the repercussions of it. So we owe people the time to slow down and say it right and do it right. And by the way, he gave the money back. Claimed,
Good for you. Good for you to get that money back. I want to ask you a question in terms of, okay, you have that situation, you have that story right there where you made a mistake. How did you actually handle that in real time to really have that conversation with the person that you kind of let down in terms of your leadership? How did you handle that?
Yeah. Well, it really was quite traumatic, if you can imagine. It was cash.
For sure.
It's not like bearer bonds are pretty much, straight up cash. So, I immediately set the individual down and simply said, I want to make very clear, you did everything I asked you to do. Unfortunately, I didn't tell you everything to do. From this moment on, your learning is going to be from my mistake, not about the process of this, but so that when you're a manager and a leader, you don't do what I did. So watch how I handle this, take responsibility, how I take responsibility, and I hope in 10, 20 years, you're having the same, conversation about your own leadership, that you're more meticulous when you explain things, and you also own a problem, because leaders need to own the situation.
What keeps leaders from doing that? I mean, we had a sign the year we won Super Bowl 50 that had said accountability in the back of the room. But what keeps leaders from being accountable, from doing what you did, saying, hey, this is on me? What do you think, in your experience, keeps leaders from doing that and entering that space?
Yeah, and even though that was so long ago, it still gives me a stomachache.
I'm sure.
There's only one thing. There's only one thing, and that is ego. Leaders tend to work very hard to protect their image, to protect this wall that says, I'm the leader, so respect me. There's only one true way to get respect, and there's only one true way to get results. You need to be authentic, and you need to lead. And leadership means being vulnerable, making mistakes, owning them, and asking for help, whether it's from the people that are on your team, from your peers in the community, from your mentors. Geez, we can't do it alone. It's really hard, right? It's really hard. And just kind of have to let it go. I think it goes to the number one mistake I think leaders make, and that is that they are not open to negative news. Mm. And the minute you're not open to negative news, nobody will tell you. And you are completely set up for failure, and so are they, and so is any team or company that you're running.
Do you think you've always been open to that type of feedback? I think you're totally spot on in terms of ego. It's one of the hardest things when I'm working with a leader or coaching a leader, and we've seen it in professional sports, is that ego is the enemy. I know that's a book, but ego really is the enemy. Do you think you've always been open to that constructive feedback and to just really having a learning and a growth mindset?
Oh, no.
Okay. Now let's dive in.
Not.
Let's dive in.
Right? I do think that in your earlier phases of your career, you just sort of have to fake it till you make it, right? And the guidance there is pretend you're open to it, even if you're not, right? Yeah. But no. It kind of comes with time, too. Once you've been through enough experiences and had enough successes and had enough failures to see that it all sort of evens out, you don't have those big highs and lows when people push back on you. They're more visible, and you have to decide if that's the leadership kind of role that you really want to take on, because it comes with it. But no, I think you learn that. And you just learn to slow down and be patient and not take everybody's feedback as gospel, good or bad. Mm-hmm. You just learn to internalize pieces of it because nobody's ever really correct in their feedback about you. Yeah. I mean, Ryan, I think you're amazing.
Incorrect.
But,
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, I think we learn and we just get more comfortable with it.
One of the things I love about your success story, you've built part of the city here in Denver. You've done real estate. You're now doing some stuff with sports. I mean, how do you go through all these different areas and say, there's a role for me there?
Well, I think I just show up, right?
Do you make a role every time, or do you say, hey, I'm your business developer, I'm your CEO, I'm CEO or nothing? Or
Here
what?
I am.
Yeah, how do you go in those? I mean, those are very different spaces to a lot of people. And you've succeeded at all of them.
Shout out to Tami for just showing up.
Yeah.
Shout out to you.
I told you,
Love
Hall
that.
of Famer. She's a Business Journal Hall of Famer.
There you go. You know, I do believe that I love being with people. I love making a difference. It doesn't have to be me making the difference, but being part of a team that makes a difference. I love to learn, and I like to take information from one realm and link it to another realm. You know, take different groups of people or types of business and find ways to bridge them together, because really that's where innovation happens, right? Yeah. And I think there's nothing cooler than to connect two people from totally different worlds that find a path together, whether it's a friendship or a business venture or a nonprofit venture.
Or a podcast.
Or a podcast.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of back to my old days. I used to have a radio show, so
really,
I sort of feel.
What haven't you done?
Yeah, banking, radio show, city building. What?
Yeah.
What's next? I guess then. What are you going to do next?
Yeah, can we dive into that?
Yeah,
can we dive into? Can we dive into what you're doing now? Can you give the listeners to what you're doing right now?
Yes. So I'm serving as the CEO of a vertically integrated real estate development company. So we are building our own development projects in multiple states and building neighborhoods and building the industry office brand. And then on top of that, we do third-party work in about 7 states. So we're building everything from multifamily buildings to office, you name it. So, yeah.
And was real estate a passion? Did you just know, like, hey, this is what I'm going to do, or this you just showed up?
Well, you know, at the heart, I'm a city builder. Going back to how I opened up, it's really about building cities. And there's a lot of ways to build cities. You build cities with sports teams. You build cities with museums. You build cities with buildings, but mostly you build cities with heart. And I really mean that because you've all been to cities that lack a soul, right? You've been there. You can process them in your head. And even the toughest cities out there can have deep soul and passion and love for the place that people live. But why is that? And it really is because of all these different pieces that build it together. So that's who I am, and that's who I'll always be, trying to build the pieces that create a place that people can be their very best selves.
While you're building, creating, innovating, while you're doing these things, how do you handle the pushback? How do you handle someone saying, not seeing the vision or not seeing the piece of the puzzle and how it matters? How do you handle those moments?
Well, I'm a very pragmatic leader. I've always had a strong vision, but I'm pretty pragmatic. And in many of my roles, particularly the ones that are more political in nature, there's definitely that. And in fairness, people don't generally push back for no reason. But more often than not, it's not the reason they're articulating. Wow. And they may not even know that, right? Perhaps let's go to something very straightforward, like a zoning issue. Right. Well, zoning throughout our history and the way cities were built have created opportunities or blocked them off. Yeah. And so often when a zoning issue comes to a community, are they really concerned that you're going to build a new residential building in that area, or is it something else? And I believe you have to really get to what the something else is to understand what you're trying to solve. We spend a lot of time trying to solve the wrong problem. And so if we can get to really understand what the problem is, we'll do a far better job finding the right solution. Hey, and frankly, sometimes I'm just wrong.
Yeah.
You know.
Once
I
in a
don't
while.
want to always. No, it's fair. Wrong about the whole idea or wrong about pieces of it. Or sometimes I charge too fast and too far ahead before I listen. And I got to rewind that. And sometimes I have to deal with other people that are doing that, and I need to rewind them. You know.
I just love your leadership. I love the energy that you're bringing. Can you talk a little bit about, because I know you're a YPO member, can you talk a little bit about just that peer group? Because I think that's super important. When you're around a lot of high performers, it's one of the best things about professional sports is that you have this incredible locker room, you have this incredible people that you see all the time that push you forward. How does YPO play a role in terms of your leadership and how you show up?
Well, whether it's YPO or any other peer-related group, I really encourage people to find their people, the ones that will challenge them and also make them really think much more boldly about who they are and who they want to be. Because it's one thing to get advice about a decision, you know, should I do this or should I do that? It's another thing for somebody to say, you know, Benny, you're not thinking big enough. You're just not thinking big enough. The only thing holding you back right now is you. So that's the kind of thing that when people say that to me, you're not thinking big enough, those are the harder things to hear than should you make decision A or B. YPO's been great, especially in the sense that people are really vulnerable. Look, whether you're a leader, whether you're an innovator, an entrepreneur, we're all just human. Things hurt. They hurt our feelings. They make us feel like failures. They make us feel like we don't know what we're doing. And sometimes we don't, and people need to tell us that too. But mostly it's a place and a space where people can just be honest and say, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. Right? So I think that's really the value. And I hope for everyone that they can find a friend group or an organization that can surround them with people who want them to be bigger, bolder, stronger, more adventurous than they ever imagined that they could be.
Brian, who's that group for you?
Honestly, Leadership Denver. And I was going to say, you know, it's a group out of the chamber, Denver Chamber of Commerce. And I always thought Chamber of Commerce, I was like, what is that? You know, you're getting some iced tea and water. But, you know, knowing Tammi.
Name tags.
Yeah. But, you know, Tammi was one of the people I met who had been and involved with the chamber through the Downtown Denver Partnership. And, you know, there's some couple other people. And in addition to teammates, like especially in the business world, I just could go to this group and still have them of people who, like you said, challenge you, say you're not thinking big enough, or say it's a waste of your time, you know, and people who, frankly, can overlook my favorite word that Tammi just said, failure. I mean, to me, part of that peer group is helping you overcome failure if you need it. And I also know about Benny because we played together. I call it fortunate failure, right? Well, how do you see failures, and how do you handle them in your personal, professional life?
Well, I see failures far differently than, you know, my first 10 years in the business world, right? When you don't have a whole bunch of experience on the field or in a company, every failure is a larger percentage of your time and your experiences. And so I think what happens is as you collect more experiences, they just aren't as impactful. And you really understand that you have enough experience to navigate through them. But it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt or that you wish you hadn't done something differently. When I have failures, the things that hit me the most are when I feel like I've handled a relationship wrong. That to me is what hurts worse. Like making a bad business decision or taking a wrong strategic approach. You know, those can be resolved, maybe painfully, but they can be resolved.
Right.
But it's really difficult and much harder to go back and repair something because you didn't handle it right. And so that's where the failures hurt me the most.
And that speaks to it once again speaks to your leadership because you care about people. I think, when you let somebody down in terms of relationship or you fail in terms of relationship, it's definitely one of the toughest things that we can all go through. But shout out to you for actually, really caring. Definitely wanted to just acknowledge that.
Thank you.
We're going to do some fast action questions now to wrap things up. What is one thing people do not learn in school that is an absolute must being successful in business?
They do not learn to be innovative. Our school system is really structured to follow a framework of learning, learn it, recite it, regurgitate it, and we're rewarded for memorizing knowledge and information that has already been collected. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe that people learn and get comfortable enough to just put themselves out there.
What are the keys to innovation? Because when I hear innovation, that sounds like mindset to me, right? Like innovation, but what does innovation mean to Tammi Dorr?
Well, just doing something differently, right? I think very often people aren't even asking the question. They're just doing it as the directions say, right? So
I'm like that, by the way. I'm a black and white thinker. What does the directions say? Okay, that's what I'm going to do.
I'm a framework guy. Let's take it to the roof.
Yeah, well, the truth is so am I. It's comfortable, right? If I just follow the rules, nobody can say that if I make a mistake, it's the result of whoever made the rules.
Right.
And, you just have to learn to step out, even in the smallest of ways. And I think we could do a much better job. Was this like a one-word answer and I'm still wrong?
No.
Okay, got you.
Answer.
Okay,
No, heck no.
I got you.
What is a leadership story that makes you smile when you think back at it? When you think back on a story that makes you smile in terms of your leadership and how you showed up, what's that story?
Well, in terms of how I showed up, let me flip it for just a minute.
Yeah.
I had a great leadership lesson from a CEO I worked for. And my very first day on the job, he brought me into his office and he said, I have 3 things I want to tell you. And, I have my paper and my pen. I'm all ready. I'm going to write it down. And he said, number 1, always make sure that you save for your future. Okay.
All right. Yeah.
Check. 2, always be your authentic self. And 3, you need me to tell me today what you want to be in the next 10 years, because starting this very minute in this meeting, we're going to get you there. And I told him I want to be a CEO, and he said, okay, today we start that journey. And I've used that consistently with anyone that I've brought on as a new team member. But it came from him, and it was real and he did. From that day on, everything went to how I can get you to be a CEO.
That's just such an incredible story, because you see a lot of people leave organizations because they don't feel seen and they don't feel heard. Yeah. And it sounds like he made you feel seen and heard, and now you make people still feel seen and heard. And it really is a trickle-down effect in terms of how people show up. So, number 1, shout out to him for that lesson, but then you carrying it on to all the organizations that you've been in. So, that's great.
Well, I feel really fortunate. I have had probably about 15 of my team members through the years all become CEOs of varying size of organizations, but that is really gratifying. And then really my primary leadership advice to anyone is simple. Always be kind, have a good attitude, and never give up.
Awesome. Shout out to Tammi Dorr.
Yes, the Tammi Dorr. Thank you so much for joining us on Gridiron and Growth. You're the best. We appreciate you greatly.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate being here.